The security cameras felt like spotlights as the store manager's footsteps echoed behind me, mirroring every turn I made through the aisles. I could feel his eyes burning into my back, following my every movement as if I were a criminal rather than a customer with money to spend. The sound of his leather shoes against the polished marble floor had become a haunting rhythm that matched my accelerating heartbeat. Little did he know, this humiliating moment would soon turn into something he'd never forget, a lesson that would change not just his perspective, but the entire culture of this establishment. Which country are you listening from? Tell us in the comments below. My name is Maya Thompson, and I've been calling suburban Atlanta home for the past 5 years. At 32 years old, I'm a senior marketing director at a rapidly growing tech startup called Innovate Tech Solutions, where I lead a team of 12 brilliant minds in developing campaigns for Fortune 500 companies. My corner office overlooks the bustling streets of Midtown, and my business cards carry titles that my grandmother could have only dreamed of when she cleaned houses to put food on the table. I earned my MBA from Emory University's prestigious Goizueta Business School, graduating summa cum laude with a concentration in digital marketing strategy. The degree hangs proudly in my apartment, right next to my undergraduate diploma from Spelman College and a framed photo of me shaking hands with the CEO of Coca-Cola after we secured their account. These achievements represent more than personal success. They're testimony to the sacrifices my parents made when they left everything behind in Kingston, Jamaica, to give their unborn daughter a chance at the American dream. My daily routine is carefully structured around excellence and preparation. I wake up at 5:30 a.m. for a morning run through Piedmont Park, listening to podcasts about leadership and innovation while my feet pound the pavement. By 7 a.m., I'm reviewing market reports over coffee and steel-cut oats, mentally preparing for the challenges ahead. My Honda Civic Touring, practical, reliable, and paid off, carries me through Atlanta's notorious traffic to an office where I'm often the only black woman in leadership meetings, but where my voice carries weight because I've proven my worth through results that speak louder than prejudice. Evenings and weekends are dedicated to giving back to the community that shaped me. I volunteer at the East Atlanta Community Center, tutoring high school students in business principles and helping them navigate college applications. Every Saturday morning, I lead a financial literacy workshop for single mothers, teaching them about building credit, saving for emergencies, and planning for their children's education. These women remind me of my own mother, who worked double shifts as a nurse while studying for her RN certification, always believing that education was the key to breaking generational cycles of struggle. My small but meticulously decorated apartment in Virginia Highland reflects both my professional success and my cultural roots. African art pieces from local black artists hang alongside my business awards, while my grandmother's recipes are framed in the kitchen next to my Harvard Business Review certificates. I've created a space that honors where I came from while celebrating where I'm going, a constant reminder that success doesn't require abandoning your identity, but rather embracing it fully. That particular Saturday morning in late March carried the promise of spring renewal. Cherry blossoms were beginning to bloom throughout the city, and there was an energy in the air that spoke of new beginnings and fresh possibilities. I had planned this day carefully, a visit to Meridian Luxury Home Goods in the upscale Buckhead district to find the perfect housewarming gift for my colleague and friend, Sarah Martinez. Sarah had recently been promoted to Chief Technology Officer at our company, breaking her own glass ceiling as a Latina woman in tech. Her success felt like a victory for all of us who understood the extra effort required to earn respect in spaces that weren't designed for our presence. When she bought her first home, a beautiful craftsman bungalow in Grant Park, I wanted to commemorate the moment with something special. Something that would remind her daily of how far she'd come and how much her friendship meant to me. I had researched Meridian extensively before my visit. Their website showcased partnerships with local artisans, featuring handcrafted pieces that told stories of cultural heritage and artistic innovation. The price points were significant, ranging from modest decorative items at $50 to investment pieces worth several thousand. But I had been saving specifically for this purchase. My promotion 6 months earlier had finally put me in a position where I could afford to shop at establishments like this without checking my bank balance twice. The preparation for this shopping trip was as deliberate as everything else in my life. I chose my outfit with the same strategic thinking I applied to client presentations. A crisp white button-down shirt from Brooks Brothers, a tailored navy blazer that had cost me 2 weeks' worth of lunches, black slacks pressed to perfection, and my grandmother's pearl earrings for a touch of elegance and ancestral strength. My leather handbag contained my credit cards, a business card holder, and the notes I'd made about Sarah's style preferences and color schemes. My mother's voice echoed in my head as I checked my reflection one final time. Maya, baby, when you step outside that door, you carry our family's name, our community's hopes, and your own dreams. Walk with your head high, speak with confidence, and never let anyone make you feel like you don't deserve to be exactly where you are. These words had guided me through job interviews, networking events, and countless moments when I needed to remind myself that I belonged in spaces where I was often the only person who looked like me. The drive through Atlanta's sprawling metropolis took me from my diverse neighborhood, where Caribbean grocery stores sat next to Korean restaurants and Ethiopian coffee shops, to the manicured affluence of Buckhead. The transition was always striking, from neighborhoods where children played in small front yards and neighbors knew each other's names, to tree-lined streets with gated communities and houses that could have featured in architectural magazines. Meridian Luxury Home Goods occupied a corner location in the prestigious shops of Buckhead, a retail complex where the average car in the parking lot cost more than most people's annual salaries. The building itself was an architectural statement, floor-to-ceiling windows, clean lines, and a facade that whispered sophistication rather than shouting for attention. A discreet brass plaque by the entrance listed the store's credentials, featured in Southern Living, Architectural Digest, and Atlanta Home and Lifestyle magazine. As I parked my Honda between a gleaming Mercedes G-Wagon and a Tesla Model S, I felt the familiar flutter of imposter syndrome. Not because I couldn't afford to shop here, my bank account said otherwise, but because I knew that in many people's minds, my presence would require explanation. I took a deep breath, reminded myself of my achievements and my purpose, and walked toward the entrance with the confidence that my parents had sacrificed so much to help me develop. The neighborhood itself told a story of old money and new money living in careful harmony. Historic mansions with sprawling lawns stood alongside modern developments where tech entrepreneurs and business executives had built contemporary palaces. The sidewalks were pristine, the landscaping was magazine perfect, and the silence was broken only by the sound of luxury cars gliding past and the distant hum of leaf blowers maintaining suburban perfection. I had arrived at Meridian with specific intentions and a clear budget. Sarah had mentioned loving the work of ceramicists from the North Carolina mountains, and I had seen some stunning pieces on the store's Instagram account that would complement her home's aesthetic perfectly. My research had identified 3 potential items: a handcrafted vase from an artist in Asheville, a set of serving bowls from a women's cooperative in Seagrove, or a sculptural piece that could serve as both art and function. The anticipation I felt was genuine and joyful. This wasn't just about buying an expensive gift, it was about celebrating friendship, success, and the kind of life I had worked so hard to build. Sarah had been there for me during some of my most challenging professional moments, offering advice, advocacy, and the kind of solidarity that can only exist between women who understand the unique pressures of leadership in male-dominated industries. Finding the perfect gift for her new home felt like participating in a ritual of mutual success and shared dreams. The glass doors of Meridian Luxury Home Goods opened with a soft whisper, and I was immediately enveloped by an atmosphere of cultivated sophistication. The interior was a masterclass in retail psychology, soft classical music floating through hidden speakers, warm LED lighting that made everything glow like precious treasures, and the subtle scent of bergamot and cedar that spoke of luxury without being overwhelming. The floors were polished concrete with veins of gold running through them, and the walls were painted in muted tones that served as perfect backdrops for the carefully curated merchandise. The space was larger than it appeared from outside, with distinct sections flowing seamlessly into one another. To my left, a stunning display of crystal and glassware caught the light like captured rainbows. Straight ahead, furniture pieces that looked more like sculptures than functional items were arranged in vignettes that suggested refined living. To my right, the section that had drawn me here, artisanal ceramics, textiles, and decorative objects that told stories of craftsmanship and cultural heritage. A gentle chime had announced my arrival, and I took a moment to orient myself and appreciate the artistry of the space. Other customers moved quietly through the displays, a well-dressed elderly couple examining a dining room set, a younger woman in athleisure wear browsing through decorative pillows, and a man in an expensive suit studying a collection of vintage watches. Everyone seemed comfortable, welcomed, at ease in this temple of taste and affluence. That's when I first noticed him. Robert Kellerman, though I wouldn't learn his name until later, stood behind the main counter like a sentinel guarding treasure. He was perhaps 55 years old, with salt and pepper hair styled in a conservative cut, sharp features that suggested years of making quick judgments, and pale blue eyes that seemed to catalog and categorize everything in their path. His navy blazer bore the store's discreet logo, and his posture radiated the kind of authority that comes from being accustomed to having his assumptions go unchallenged. From the moment I crossed the threshold, his attention fixed on me with an intensity that felt immediately wrong. While other customers received polite nods or welcoming smiles, I was met with a stare that felt more like an assessment than acknowledgement. There was no warmth in his expression, no customer service smile, no gesture of welcome. Just a cold evaluation, as if he were calculating the likelihood of my causing some unspecified problem. I decided to give him the benefit of the doubt. Perhaps he was simply observant by nature, or maybe he was trained to be aware of all customers entering the space. I offered him the same professional smile I used in client meetings, warm but not overly familiar, confident but respectful. His expression didn't change. If anything, his eyes narrowed slightly, as if my friendliness had somehow confirmed a suspicion rather than dispelling it. Determined not to let his coldness affect my mission, I began exploring the ceramics section. The pieces were even more beautiful in person than they had appeared online. Each item was accompanied by a small card telling the artist's story, their training, their inspiration, their connection to traditional techniques passed down through generations. These weren't just objects, they were cultural artifacts, expressions of creativity that bridged past and present. I picked up a small bowl created by a Cherokee artist in North Carolina, marveling at the intricate patterns that seemed to tell stories of earth and sky. The craftsmanship was extraordinary, and the weight of it in my hands spoke of permanence and care. The price tag read $180, reasonable for such artistry, and well within my budget for Sarah's gift. That's when I heard the footsteps. At first, the sound seemed coincidental. Retail employees naturally move around their stores, checking displays, assisting customers, and maintaining the careful choreography of high-end retail. But as I moved from the ceramics to examine a collection of hand-woven textiles, the footsteps followed. When I paused to read about a tapestry created by artists in rural Georgia, I could sense someone behind me, and the feeling made my skin prickle with awareness. I turned around to find Robert approximately 10 feet away, pretending to straighten a display of candles while keeping his eyes trained on my every movement. When our gazes met, he didn't look away with embarrassment or offer assistance with professional courtesy. Instead, he maintained eye contact with the kind of steady suspicion usually reserved for known troublemakers or suspected criminals. My heart rate began to increase and I felt the familiar tension that came from being watched and judged. This wasn't paranoia or oversensitivity. This was the real-time experience of being profiled, of having my presence in this space questioned simply because of how I looked. I had experienced subtler versions of this treatment throughout my life, but the brutality of it in such an upscale establishment was both shocking and deeply hurtful. I attempted to continue browsing, moving to a display of pottery from a women's cooperative in Alabama. The pieces were stunning, functional art that spoke of tradition and innovation working in harmony. I was particularly drawn to a serving platter with a glaze that reminded me of twilight skies, something that would be perfect for Sarah's dinner parties and would serve as a conversation piece about supporting women artisans. The footsteps followed. Now there was no mistaking what was happening. Robert had abandoned any pretense of normal retail activity and was openly surveilling me. He maintained a distance of 8 to 10 feet, close enough to intervene if I made any sudden movements, far enough away to avoid direct confrontation. His body language was aggressive and territorial, arms crossed, stance wide, eyes never leaving me for more than a few seconds. Other customers in the store began to notice our strange dance. I could see them glancing between us with expressions ranging from curiosity to discomfort to what looked disturbingly like approval. A well-dressed woman in her 60s whispered something to her companion while looking in our direction. A young couple browsing furniture turned to watch as Robert and I moved through our uncomfortable choreography. The humiliation was intense and multifaceted. Not only was I being treated as a potential criminal, but this treatment was happening in front of witnesses who seemed content to watch it unfold without intervention. Their silence spoke volumes about the social contract in spaces like this, the unspoken agreement that certain people belonged and others needed to prove their right to exist there. I decided to test my theory to confirm what I already knew was happening. I walked deliberately to the opposite end of the store, where a collection of furniture was arranged to suggest elegant living rooms and sophisticated dining spaces. As expected, Robert followed, maintaining his distance but never losing sight of me. When I stopped to examine a beautiful dining table, not because I was interested in purchasing it, but because I wanted to see his reaction, he positioned himself at the end of the aisle like a border guard. The absurdity of the situation was almost overwhelming. Here I was, a woman with advanced degrees, professional success, and enough disposable income to shop comfortably in this establishment, being treated like a shoplifter. The irony wasn't lost on me that I probably earned more annually than several of the other customers who were browsing freely without any supervision. I pulled out my phone and began discreetly recording, not because I planned to create a social media spectacle, but because I had learned that documentation was protection. Too many stories like mine had been dismissed as misunderstandings or emotional overreactions. If this situation escalated, I wanted evidence of what had actually occurred. Robert noticed my phone immediately, and his demeanor shifted into an even higher state of alert. He began speaking loudly to other staff members, making comments clearly intended for me to overhear. "Make sure you keep an eye on all the displays today. We've had some issues with people coming in here who aren't serious customers." His voice carried across the store, ensuring that other customers would hear and understand that I was being classified as a problem. The psychological impact was devastating. In a matter of minutes, I had gone from being an excited friend on a gift-buying mission to feeling like an unwelcome intruder in a space where my money should have been as valuable as anyone else's. The confidence I had carefully cultivated over years of professional success began to erode under the weight of constant scrutiny and judgment. I approached a display of serving bowls, each one a unique work of art created by master ceramicists from across the Southeast. The prices ranged from $200 to $800, reflecting the skill and time required to create such pieces. I was particularly drawn to a bowl with a deep indigo glaze that seemed to hold depths of ocean and sky. It was exactly the kind of piece Sarah would treasure, something that would remind her daily of our friendship and her achievements. As I reached to examine the bowl more closely, Robert rushed over with unnecessary urgency. "Excuse me," he said, his voice sharp with authority, "but those pieces are extremely delicate and valuable. They require very careful handling." His tone was condescending, as if he were speaking to a child who couldn't be trusted around nice things. The implication was clear. I was someone who might damage expensive merchandise through carelessness or ignorance. Meanwhile, I had watched other customers handle similar items freely, examining pieces closely, and discussing their features with staff members who offered assistance rather than warnings. "Of course," I replied, my voice steady despite the anger building in my chest. "I understand their value. I'm very interested in this piece for a special gift." Robert stepped closer, invading my personal space in a way that felt both intimidating and inappropriate. "These are handcrafted by master artisans," he explained, as if I couldn't possibly appreciate such craftsmanship. "They require special knowledge to handle properly. Perhaps there's something else that might be more suitable for your needs." The suggestion that I look for something more suitable, code for cheaper, less sophisticated, more appropriate for someone like me, was the moment when subtle discrimination became an overt insult. Every other customer in the store had been treated as someone capable of appreciating and purchasing fine art. I was being steered away from the very items I had come to see, judged as incapable of understanding or affording quality craftsmanship. "I'm quite familiar with handcrafted ceramics," I said, my professional composure holding despite the tremor of anger in my voice. "I'm a serious buyer looking for an investment piece." Robert's expression remained skeptical, his body language unchanged. He positioned himself so close that I could barely move without bumping into him, creating a physical barrier between me and the merchandise. The message was unmistakable. "You don't belong here, you can't afford these things, and we don't trust you around them." The other customers had become an audience to my humiliation. Some watched with open curiosity, others with what looked disturbingly like approval of Robert's behavior. A few seemed uncomfortable but made no move to intervene or question what they were witnessing. Their silence was as painful as the surveillance itself, confirming that in their minds, this treatment was somehow normal, somehow justified, somehow acceptable. I felt trapped in a nightmare of casual racism and social complicity. Here I was in one of America's most progressive cities, being treated like a criminal simply for existing in a space where my presence was unwelcome. The weight of every stereotype, every assumption, every prejudice that had ever been directed at people who looked like me seemed to press down on my shoulders. My phone buzzed with a text from Sarah. "Hope you find something amazing today. Can't wait to see what catches your eye. You always have such incredible taste, and I know whatever you choose will be perfect. Love you, girl." The contrast between her warmth and trust and the coldness I was experiencing was almost unbearable. I looked around the store at the other customers. Mostly white, all apparently comfortable, browsing expensive items without any supervision or suspicion. They belonged here. Their presence was welcomed, their money was desired, their patronage was valued. I was the outsider, the threat, the problem that needed to be managed and contained. As the minutes passed, Robert's behavior became increasingly aggressive and performative. He began engaging other customers in warm, detailed conversations, asking about their needs, offering suggestions, and providing the kind of personalized service that high-end retail was supposed to deliver. But whenever I approached these same displays, he would fall silent, position himself defensively, and watch my every movement with barely concealed hostility. The contrast was stark and deliberately humiliating. A young woman browsing picture frames received detailed information about the artists and framing techniques. An elderly man examining lamps was offered a catalog and invited to special order custom pieces. A couple looking at furniture was provided with fabric samples and interior design consultation services. But when I approached any of these displays, the warm customer service atmosphere would freeze. Robert would stop mid-sentence in conversations with other customers, position himself between me and the merchandise, and watch my hands as if I might pocket something at any moment. The message was clear and consistent. Every other customer was a valued guest while I was a potential criminal. I overheard him speaking to a young female employee who seemed increasingly uncomfortable with the situation. "Keep watching section 3, he said quietly, nodding toward where I was browsing. "Make sure everything stays exactly where it's supposed to be. Some people come in here just to case the place." The young woman, she couldn't have been more than 25, glanced at me with what looked like embarrassment and confusion. She seemed to understand that something was wrong with what she was being asked to do, but she was clearly afraid to challenge her supervisor. She nodded reluctantly and moved to a position where she could observe me while pretending to organize inventory. Now I was being watched by 2 employees, turned into a suspected criminal by the kind of racial profiling that I had hoped was becoming less common in progressive spaces. The young employee's discomfort gave me hope that not everyone accepted this behavior as normal, but her silence also demonstrated how systems of discrimination persist when good people choose not to challenge them. I continued browsing, determined not to be driven away by behavior that was clearly wrong and potentially illegal. I had every right to be in this store, every right to examine merchandise, every right to take my time making a purchase decision. I would not allow Robert's prejudice to rob me of my dignity or my mission to find something beautiful for Sarah. As I moved through the store, I began noticing other subtle forms of discrimination that I might have missed if I hadn't been hyper-aware of being watched. The lighting in the sections where I browsed seemed dimmer, making it harder to see fine details in the artwork. Price tags were positioned in ways that made them difficult to read without handling items extensively, something that Robert clearly didn't want me to do. Information cards about artists and techniques were placed behind items rather than in front, making it impossible to learn about pieces without moving them. These weren't coincidences. They were part of a systematic approach to making certain customers feel unwelcome, to create barriers that would discourage prolonged browsing or serious purchasing consideration. The store's layout and lighting worked beautifully for preferred customers but became obstacles for those deemed unworthy of full access. I realized that I was experiencing a masterclass in modern discrimination, subtle enough to be deniable, effective enough to be devastating. If I complained about being followed, Robert could claim he was providing attentive service. If I mentioned the poor lighting or difficult-to-read price tags, he could argue that was simply the store's aesthetic choice. Every element of discrimination was wrapped in plausible deniability. The psychological impact was exhausting. I found myself second-guessing every movement, every gesture, every expression. Was I walking too slowly and appearing suspicious? Was I examining items too closely and seeming like I was looking for something to steal? Was my phone use making me appear threatening? The mental energy required to navigate this hostility while trying to complete a simple shopping task was overwhelming. Other customers continued to flow through the store, their experiences completely different from mine. They touched items freely, asked detailed questions, took photos of pieces they were considering, and generally behaved like people who belonged in an upscale retail environment. Their comfort highlighted my discomfort, their ease emphasized my anxiety, their welcome underscored my rejection. I watched a middle-aged white woman handle a $500 vase extensively, turning it over to examine the artist's signature, taking photos from multiple angles, and discussing delivery options with a staff member. When I had merely reached toward a similar piece, Robert had rushed over with warnings about delicacy and value. The double standard was glaring and painful. At one point, I moved to a section displaying artwork by contemporary Southern artists. The pieces were stunning, paintings and photographs that captured the beauty and complexity of our region's landscape and culture. I was particularly drawn to a series of photographs showing the changing seasons in the Appalachian Mountains, Images that spoke to the kind of natural beauty that made the South special despite its complicated history. As I studied these photographs, trying to imagine which one Sarah might love for her new home, Robert positioned himself directly behind me. I could feel his breath on my neck, sense his presence like a physical weight pressing down on my shoulders. When I moved to see a different angle of one photograph, he moved with me, maintaining his uncomfortably close surveillance. "The lighting here makes it difficult to see the true colors," I said, partly to myself and partly to test whether he would offer the kind of assistance that other customers were receiving. "These pieces are quite expensive," Robert replied, as if price were the only relevant information I needed. "Perhaps the poster section might have something more in your range." The suggestion that I look at posters instead of original artwork was so insulting that I actually gasped. He wasn't just questioning my ability to afford fine art. He was actively directing me away from it toward mass-produced items that required no appreciation for craftsmanship or artistic vision. "I'm not looking for posters," I said, my voice tight with controlled anger. "I'm interested in original artwork by regional artists." Robert's expression remained unchanged, his skepticism undiminished. "Well, these pieces require serious commitment. They're not impulse purchases." The implication that I was someone who made impulse purchases rather than thoughtful investment decisions was another layer of insult. Meanwhile, I had watched him encourage other customers to take time to consider various pieces, offering to hold items while they thought about their decisions or consulted with spouses or decorators. I pulled out my phone again, this time more obviously, and began researching the artists whose work was displayed. I wanted Robert to see that I was educating myself about their backgrounds, their techniques, their place in the contemporary art world. I was demonstrating the kind of serious interest that should have earned me respectful treatment from any competent salesperson. But instead of recognizing my genuine engagement with the artwork, Robert seemed to interpret my phone use as suspicious activity. He called over another employee, a middle-aged man who had been helping other customers with enthusiasm and expertise. "Tom," Robert said, his voice carrying clearly across the section, "keep an eye on things here. We've been having some issues with people taking unauthorized photos." The accusation was clear. I was now suspected not just of potential theft, but of intellectual property violation. The fact that other customers had been taking photos freely with staff encouragement made the targeting obvious and painful. Tom looked between Robert and me with obvious confusion. "Is there a problem?" he asked, his tone suggesting he didn't understand why he was being called over. "Just stay alert," Robert replied, his eyes never leaving me. "Some people come in here without serious intentions." The public nature of this exchange was devastating. Other customers could hear Robert's implications, could see me being marked as suspicious, could witness my humiliation in real time. I felt my face burning with embarrassment and anger, but I also felt a growing determination not to be driven away by this treatment. "Actually," I said, my voice loud enough for nearby customers to hear, "I am a serious customer looking for a significant piece to commemorate a friend's achievement. I would appreciate being treated with the same respect and assistance that I've observed other customers receiving." My words hung in the air like a challenge. Tom looked uncomfortable, clearly recognizing that something inappropriate was happening. A few other customers had stopped their browsing to listen, sensing tension in the atmosphere. Robert's face flushed slightly, but his expression remained defiant. "We treat all customers appropriately," he said stiffly. "Our security protocols apply to everyone." But even as he spoke, I could see other customers handling merchandise freely, taking photos and receiving personal attention from staff members. His security protocols seemed to apply specifically to me, making his claim of equal treatment obviously false. The situation had reached a breaking point. I could continue trying to shop while being harassed and humiliated, or I could leave and allow Robert's prejudice to win. Neither option felt acceptable. I deserved to be treated with dignity, and Sarah deserved the beautiful gift I had come to find. Just as I was weighing my options, considering whether to demand to speak with a manager or simply walk away with whatever dignity I could salvage, I heard a familiar voice from across the store that would change everything. Maya Thompson. "Oh my God, is that really you?" The voice cut through the tension like a warm breeze dispersing storm clouds. I turned toward the sound and saw a face that triggered an immediate flood of memories and emotions. David Richardson, my former classmate from Emory's MBA program, walking toward me with arms outstretched and a smile that could have powered the entire store. David looked successful and confident, wearing an expensive suit that fit him perfectly and carrying himself with the easy assurance of someone who had achieved his professional goals. But there was something else about his presence in this space. He moved through it with the familiarity of ownership, the comfort of someone who belonged here not just as a customer, but as the person in charge. David? I said, my voice reflecting genuine surprise and confusion. What are you doing here? What am I doing here? He laughed, approaching me with the kind of enthusiasm reserved for unexpected reunions with old friends. Maya, I own this place. Meridian Luxury Home Goods is my baby, my pride and joy. I cannot believe you're here in my store. How long has it been? 2 years? 3? The word owner hit Robert like a physical blow. I could see his face drain of color as he watched his boss, the actual owner of the establishment where he had just spent an hour treating me like a criminal, embracing me with obvious affection and respect. His aggressive posture crumbled, his authoritative demeanor evaporated, and his confident surveillance transformed into barely controlled panic. You own this store? I asked, still processing the incredible coincidence that was about to transform this entire situation. Bought it 3 years ago and completely transformed it, David explained, his enthusiasm infectious and genuine. We specialize in supporting local and regional artisans, giving them a platform to reach customers who appreciate real craftsmanship and cultural significance. It's been incredibly rewarding, both personally and professionally. He gestured around the space with obvious pride, pointing out specific improvements he had made to the layout, lighting, and display strategies. But enough about me and my retail adventures. What brings you here? Are you still conquering the marketing world? I heard through our Emory alumni network that you were doing incredible things in the tech industry. The irony of the situation was almost overwhelming. Here was David, treating me with the respect and recognition that should have been automatic from the moment I walked through his doors, while his store manager had spent the last hour making me feel like an unwelcome intruder. The contrast was stark and damning. Robert stood frozen nearby, clearly calculating the magnitude of his mistake and the potential consequences for his employment. His face had gone from flushed with righteous authority to pale with terrified realization. Every assumption he had made, every prejudiced action he had taken, every moment of discriminatory treatment was now exposed in the harsh light of his boss's obvious respect for me. Actually, I said, my voice gaining strength as I processed the power shift that had just occurred, I came here specifically to find a special housewarming gift for a colleague who just bought her first home. I was hoping to find something meaningful from your ceramics collection. I'd read about your partnerships with North Carolina artisans. Oh, you've come to exactly the right place. David exclaimed, his business passion clearly activated. We just received a new collection from some incredible artists in Asheville and Seagrove. These pieces are absolutely stunning, functional art that tells stories about Southern craft traditions and contemporary innovation. He began walking toward the ceramics section where I had been browsing, then stopped abruptly and looked around with confusion. Wait, where's Robert? He should have been helping you from the moment you walked in. Robert. Robert appeared as if summoned, his usual confident stride replaced by an uncertain shuffle. His hands were actually shaking slightly, and sweat had begun to bead on his forehead despite the store's comfortable temperature. Mr. Richardson, he stammered, his voice lacking its earlier authority, I was monitoring the floor, ensuring security protocols. Security protocols? David interrupted, his tone shifting from confusion to concern. Maya is one of my oldest friends from business school, one of the smartest people in our entire MBA class. She was absolutely brilliant in our strategy courses, and I heard she graduated summa cum laude. He turned to me with obvious pride and affection. Maya, I want you to get the full VIP treatment here. Robert, I want you to personally ensure that she sees every piece that might interest her, that she understands the provenance and significance of our artist's work, and that she has everything she needs to make the perfect choice. The transformation in Robert's demeanor was immediate and complete. The suspicious glare was replaced by an obsequious smile that looked physically painful to maintain. The aggressive posture melted into subservient bowing, and the cold surveillance became overwhelming, desperate attention. Of course, Mr. Richardson, Robert said, his voice now warm and accommodating in a way that would have been laughable if it weren't so insulting. Miss Thompson, I sincerely apologize if there was any misunderstanding about our service approach. How can I best assist you today? I looked at this man who had spent the last hour making me feel unwelcome in his store, who had followed me like a detective tracking a suspect, who had questioned my right to exist in this space, and I felt a complex mixture of emotions. There was satisfaction in seeing his discomfort, anger at his previous behavior, and sadness that it had taken the validation of a white man for me to be treated with basic human dignity. But I also recognized the bigger picture. This wasn't just about Robert's individual prejudice, it was about a system that allowed such behavior to flourish unchallenged, a culture that made assumptions about people based on their appearance, and a society that required the intervention of privilege to recognize someone's humanity. Actually, I said, my voice steady and clear, I've been browsing quite successfully on my own. I've had plenty of time to examine your merchandise, very thoroughly. The emphasis on thoroughly wasn't lost on anyone present. David looked confused by the tension in the air, sensing undercurrents he didn't fully understand. Robert understood exactly what I meant, and his face flushed with the recognition of his exposed behavior. Is everything okay here? David asked, his business instincts picking up on the uncomfortable atmosphere. I looked directly at Robert, who was now sweating profusely and clearly terrified about what I might tell his boss. He knew that his job was potentially on the line, that his discriminatory behavior had been witnessed and could be reported. He knew that everything he had assumed about me had been proven wrong in the most embarrassing way possible. But I also thought about the larger implications of this moment. This wasn't just about punishing one person's prejudice, it was about creating an opportunity for education, growth, and systematic change. I could destroy Robert's career with a few sentences, but that wouldn't necessarily change his attitudes or prevent similar treatment of future customers. David, I said carefully, I'd like to ask you something important. What kind of training do you provide your staff about customer service? Specifically, about ensuring that all customers feel equally welcomed and respected. David's enthusiastic expression grew more serious as he recognized that this was more than casual conversation. Well, we have comprehensive customer service training that emphasizes professionalism, courtesy, and respect for all customers regardless of their background or appearance. Everyone should receive the same high level of attention and assistance. Why do you ask? I chose my words deliberately, wanting to create change without necessarily destroying Robert's livelihood. Because I think there might be some inconsistencies in how those protocols are being implemented. Some customers seem to receive more attentive service than others. The store had grown quiet around us. Other customers had stopped their browsing to listen to our conversation, sensing that something significant was happening. The young female employee who had been reluctantly asked to watch me earlier was standing nearby, looking relieved that the uncomfortable situation was finally being addressed. David looked between Robert and me, his MBA-trained analytical mind clearly processing the subtext and implications of our exchange. Robert, he said, his voice taking on a more authoritative tone, is there something we need to discuss about customer service protocols? Robert's mouth opened and closed several times as he struggled to find words that might salvage the situation without admitting to discriminatory behavior that could have legal implications for the business. He could deny everything, but he knew I might have been recording. He could try to justify his actions, but any explanation would only make things worse. He could apologize, but that would be admitting to behavior that violated both company policy and federal law. I was being thorough with our security awareness, he finally managed, his voice barely above a whisper. Security awareness? David repeated, his voice rising with concern and confusion. Maya, were you made to feel uncomfortable or unwelcome in any way? This was my moment of maximum power. I could detail every humiliation, every discriminatory action, every moment of surveillance and suspicion. I could expose Robert's behavior completely, potentially ending his career and creating a public relations nightmare for David's business. I could seek the kind of justice that would feel satisfying and validating. But I thought about my parents, about the lessons they had taught me about dignity and grace under pressure. I thought about the kind of person I wanted to be, the kind of example I wanted to set, and the kind of change I wanted to see in the world. I thought about transformation versus punishment, education versus revenge, healing versus harm. David, I began, my voice carrying the authority that came from years of leadership experience and moral clarity, I think what's most important is that we all learn from today's experience and use it as an opportunity for growth. I looked directly at Robert, whose face had gone through several color changes and was now settling into an unhealthy pallor. Your store is absolutely beautiful, your merchandise is exceptional, and I can see why you're so proud of what you've built here. The partnerships with local artisans are exactly the kind of business model that creates a positive impact in our community. David nodded, but I could see in his eyes that he was still processing the implications of my carefully chosen words. His business acumen was telling him there was much more to this story, and his friendship with me was making him concerned about what might have transpired. However, I continued, my voice gaining strength, I do think there's a significant opportunity for improvement in terms of ensuring that all customers, regardless of their appearance, age, race, or any other characteristic, receive the same warm welcome and respectful service from the moment they enter your establishment." The weight of those words settled over the group like a blanket. Robert's breathing had become noticeably shallow, and small beads of sweat continued to form on his forehead. The young female employee nearby nodded almost imperceptibly, as if grateful that someone was finally addressing what she had witnessed. "Robert," I said, turning to face him directly, "I hope that in the future, every customer who walks through these doors feels as welcomed and valued as I do right now in this moment, talking with David about the beautiful work you're doing here." The message was crystal clear, delivered with precision and grace. Robert's behavior had been noted, documented, and could be reported at any time. But I was offering him something precious, the opportunity to learn, grow, and become better. I was giving him a chance to transform his prejudices into understanding, his discrimination into inclusive service. Robert's voice was barely audible when he responded. "Yes, ma'am. Absolutely. Every customer deserves our best service and fullest respect." David, sensing that he was witnessing something profound but still not understanding all the details, immediately shifted into solution mode. "Absolutely, Maya. You know what? I want to schedule comprehensive diversity and inclusion training for our entire staff. Would you be willing to consult with us on creating a more welcoming environment for all customers? I'd pay your full consulting rate, of course." The offer was unexpected and meaningful. Not only was David taking responsibility for addressing the problems in his store, but he was also recognizing my expertise and offering me the opportunity to create systemic change rather than just individual punishment. "I would be honored to help," I replied, feeling the first genuine warmth I had experienced since entering the store. Creating inclusive retail environments is something I'm passionate about, both professionally and personally. "Perfect," David exclaimed, his enthusiasm returning as he saw a path forward. "But right now, let me show you those ceramics I mentioned. And Robert, please bring us some refreshments, coffee, water, whatever Maya would prefer." As we walked toward the ceramics section, David leaned in close and spoke quietly. "Maya, I get the feeling there's more to this story than I'm understanding. Are you okay? Did something happen that I need to know about as the owner of this business?" I appreciated his concern and his willingness to address problems, but I also knew that this moment was about more than just getting Robert in trouble. "I'm fine now," I said honestly. "But David, as both a friend and a business owner, you might want to consider how customers are greeted and treated when you're not here. The culture of a business is defined by what happens when the owner isn't watching." He nodded seriously, clearly understanding that there were larger implications to consider. "Point taken. I promise you we're going to address this systematically." Over the next hour, David personally guided me through the store, sharing the stories behind various pieces, introducing me to staff members as his esteemed friend and colleague, and providing the kind of personalized attention that every customer deserved from the beginning. His genuine enthusiasm for the artists and their work was infectious, and his knowledge of the cultural and historical significance of various pieces was impressive. I learned about Maria Santos, a ceramicist from Asheville whose grandmother had taught her traditional techniques passed down through generations of Mexican artisans. Her work bridged cultural heritage with contemporary American aesthetics, creating pieces that told stories of immigration, adaptation, and artistic evolution. There was also James Carter, a young black artist from rural Georgia whose pottery reflected both African traditions and Southern folk art influences. His pieces were bold, colorful, and unapologetically celebratory of cultural identity. David had discovered him at a small craft fair and had become one of his primary supporters and promoters. As we explored the collection, I found myself drawn to a stunning piece that perfectly captured what I wanted for Sarah. A large serving bowl created by Elena Rodriguez, a Latina artist from North Carolina whose work celebrated the strength and resilience of women. The bowl was functional art, something that could be used for special occasions while serving as a daily reminder of beauty, craftsmanship, and cultural pride. The piece was more expensive than I had originally planned to spend, $450, but it was perfect for Sarah in ways that went beyond aesthetics. It represented the kind of investment in artistry and cultural appreciation that would be meaningful to someone who had worked so hard to break barriers in her own field. "This is the one," I told David, feeling genuinely excited about the gift for the first time since entering the store. "Excellent choice," he said with obvious approval. "Elena is incredibly talented, and this piece represents some of her finest work. Sarah is going to love it." When we approached the checkout counter, Robert appeared one final time to process the purchase. His hands shook slightly as he carefully wrapped the bowl in protective material, and when he handed me the receipt, he looked me in the eyes for the first time all day. "Thank you for your business, Miss Thompson," he said quietly, his voice carrying what sounded like genuine remorse. I hope you'll consider visiting us again." The apology wasn't explicit, but the acknowledgement was clear. He understood that his behavior had been wrong, that his assumptions had been harmful, and that he had a choice to make about the kind of person and employee he wanted to be going forward. "Thank you, Robert," I replied simply. "I hope so too." As David walked me to the door, he handed me his business card along with a personal note. "Please stay in touch," he said earnestly. "And I want to schedule that diversity training as soon as possible. What you've given us today, the opportunity to recognize and address our shortcomings, is a gift. Thank you for handling this with such grace." "Thank you for being willing to listen and learn," I replied. "That's not always the case in situations like this." We shook hands, and I could see in his eyes that he understood the gravity of what had occurred and the importance of taking meaningful action in response. As I walked to my car, the beautiful ceramic bowl safely secured in my passenger seat, I felt a complex mixture of emotions washing over me like waves on a shore. There was exhaustion from the stress of being surveilled and judged, satisfaction from the way the situation had resolved, and hope that my response might contribute to positive change. The drive home through Atlanta's busy streets gave me time to process everything that had happened. I could have handled the situation differently at every stage. I could have left the store immediately when Robert's surveillance became obvious, taking my dignity and my money elsewhere. I could have confronted him directly, demanding explanations and apologies that might have escalated into a public scene. I could have called for the manager immediately, creating a confrontation that would have been satisfying but potentially destructive. Instead, I had chosen a different path, one that required immense self-control and strategic thinking, but one that ultimately created the possibility for education, growth, and systemic change. I had refused to let Robert's prejudice define my response or diminish my power. I had maintained my dignity while standing up for my rights. I had created an opportunity for transformation rather than simply seeking punishment. This approach didn't mean that Robert's behavior was acceptable or that discrimination should be tolerated. It meant that I had refused to let someone else's ignorance dictate my actions or reduce me to my worst impulses. It meant choosing the harder path of constructive response over the easier path of destructive reaction. The following weeks brought unexpected developments. David contacted me within days to schedule our first consultation meeting about diversity and inclusion training. He had already begun researching best practices for creating welcoming retail environments and had started conversations with other business owners about collaborative approaches to addressing unconscious bias. When I returned to Meridian Luxury Home Goods 3 weeks later, not as a customer, but as a consultant, the atmosphere had already begun to shift. Robert was still there, but something fundamental had changed in his demeanor. He greeted me professionally and respectfully, asking genuine questions about customer service improvement and listening carefully to my responses. During our private conversation that day, he looked directly at me and said something that I will never forget. "Miss Thompson, I owe you an apology that goes far deeper than what happened in the store. I owe you an apology for all the assumptions I made, all the prejudices I carried, all the times I treated people differently because of how they looked rather than who they were." His voice was heavy with emotion as he continued, "You could have gotten me fired. You could have destroyed my reputation. You could have made an example of me in the worst possible way. Instead, you gave me something I didn't deserve, the chance to learn, to grow, to become better. I want you to know that I'm grateful, and I'm committed to earning the trust you showed in me." That conversation meant more to me than any public vindication could have. Real change doesn't happen through punishment and humiliation. It happens through understanding, education, and the courage to see shared humanity even in moments of conflict. 6 months later, I attended the grand reopening celebration for Meridian's newly renovated space. David had expanded the store and implemented new practices designed to ensure that every customer felt welcomed and valued. The staff had completed comprehensive diversity training, and new hiring practices had brought greater diversity to the team itself. Sarah was there too, admiring the beautiful serving bowl that had prompted this entire journey. She didn't know the full story of how I had acquired it, but she understood its significance as a symbol of friendship, achievement, and the importance of supporting artists who reflected our shared values. As I watched customers of all backgrounds browsing freely and comfortably through the store, receiving equal attention and respect from staff members, I felt a deep sense of satisfaction. One moment of discrimination had been transformed into an ongoing commitment to inclusive excellence. The vase, Elena Rodriguez's masterpiece celebrating women's strength, sits prominently in Sarah's dining room, where it serves as both functional art and daily inspiration. Every time I see it, I'm reminded of this lesson. They judged me by my skin, but I showed them the strength of my soul. But more importantly, I'm reminded that we all have choices in how we respond to injustice. We can let it make us bitter, or we can let it make us better. We can use it to justify hatred, or we can use it to create understanding. We can allow it to diminish us, or we can transform it into something that elevates everyone involved. That day in Meridian Luxury Home Goods, I could have let Robert's prejudice rob me of my dignity, my composure, and my faith in the possibility of change. Instead, I chose to maintain my humanity while helping him find his. That's not weakness, that's the kind of strength that changes hearts, minds, and ultimately, the world. Sometimes the most powerful response to discrimination isn't anger or revenge, but the revolutionary act of maintaining your dignity while creating space for others to grow. Sometimes the greatest victory isn't defeating your opponent, but transforming them into an ally. The America I'm still fighting for isn't one where discrimination doesn't exist. It's one where we have the courage to confront it when it happens, the wisdom to respond constructively rather than destructively, and the strength to believe that people can change when given the opportunity and motivation to do so. That belief isn't naive optimism, it's strategic hope. It's the understanding that sustainable change comes through transformation, not just punishment. It's the recognition that we all have the power to choose whether we add to the hatred in the world or work to reduce it. Robert's prejudice was real, harmful, and unacceptable. But my response to it was also real, and it created real change that extends far beyond that single day. That's the kind of victory that matters, not just for me but for every person who walks through those doors in the future. The ceramic bowl continues to remind Sarah daily of friendship, achievement, and the beauty that comes from supporting artists who understand struggle and transformation. But it reminds me of something even more important. That we all have the power to choose love over hate, understanding over ignorance, and hope over despair. In a world that often seems determined to divide us, that choice, made one person, one moment, one difficult situation at a time, might just be the most important work any of us can do.